That's a lot of code. You know, I've been doing a lot of technical stuff recently. I think it's time to go back to basics and do something a bit more artistic.
Hello and welcome back to another devlog for Legend 64. It's my own personal passion project that I'm working on in my spare time. The game features a visual style inspired by the classic games on the Nintendo 64. When I started this project, I had never coded anything before in my life, and everything you've seen me make up until now I've had to learn as I go. Sometimes it's a very slow and painful process, especially since this is not the only game I'm working on right now. My full-time job is as an environment artist, and I've had the opportunity to work on some really cool projects like Horizon Forbidden West and my current assignment, which I can't discuss openly with you yet. I love making environments for games, and I really enjoy the stories you can tell through them. It also feels like I'm making more progress when I can actually see more of the game come into existence. In this devlog, I'm going to show you how I approach environment design, and give you a sneak peek at a level I've made this past week. I'm working on an area near the start of the game that's hidden deep in the woods. I start by creating a mood board and filling it with reference images that have the right feeling I'm looking for. The images themselves don't necessarily need to be depicting the same type of location. I'm really using them as inspiration at this point, and not as a direct reference from which I'll build the level. Images definitely help a lot to get my creativity flowing, but I also draw inspiration from books that I've read. I enjoy scary stories, creepypastas, and urban legends quite a bit, and even though I'm not strictly making a horror game, I read one back in 2019 that really stuck with me, and actually serves as a bit of inspiration for the direction I decided to take my game in. It's the Japanese urban legend of Kisaragi Station. The story goes that a train passenger named Hasumi notices she's gotten on the wrong train after some time passes and she hasn't arrived at her stop yet. She decides to look for the conductor, but the door to the next carriage is locked, and the few other passengers on there seem to be fast asleep. Suddenly, the train slows to a stop, and Hasumi makes the decision to get off at whatever station this is and find someone to ask for help. Much to her annoyance, she finds the platform is completely empty, and heading over to check the train schedule, is dismayed to find that she is waiting at a place called Kisaragi Station, which is spelt using the kanji for devil, but is pronounced Kisaragi. I don't know that much Japanese, so I'm not sure how this actually works, as Kisaragi is spelt like this, devil is spelt like this. Even so, I find this whole idea of a dual meaning name really intriguing. Starting to become worried, Hasumi decides just to get back on the train and ride it to the last stop. That's when the train leaves the platform and Hasumi is left stranded all alone at a deserted train station with nothing but fields and mountains stretching on as far as she can see. The story goes on and takes some spooky turns, but my favourite part really is the initial setup. I love the feeling of dread that slowly starts to creep in throughout the story as Hasumi gradually begins to realise she has entered some otherworldly place and is truly all alone.
Spooky.
I had this story in particular in mind as I was making this area of my game. Making a level block out has been something I've often struggled with, as sometimes it's hard for me to appreciate the larger context in which the level will fit into, especially when there are no textures and the models are so simplistic. To help offset the abstraction, I've modeled some basic trees to help make the environment easier to read. The story for this location is that after getting lost deeper into the woods, the player will come across a barrier running through the forest, a secret gateway between worlds. I'm blocking out the level in Unreal Engine this time because I can get instant feedback whether things are the correct scale, and you can make changes and minor adjustments on the fly. I'm going for a mysterious, otherworldly vibe, so I'm going to add some fog. But not too much. I'm also going to change the colour. I find adding a little bit of atmosphere helps me during the blockout phase, so now I'm going to keep making tweaks until the level feels right. Playing the level, I can see it feels way too big, so I'm going to have to scale the whole thing down. This is about as far as I can take it when it's nothing but flat grey geometry. The space is feeling about the right size for what I had in mind, but of course I can never truly tell until the textures are in the game. So now it's time to take the block out into Blender and start arting it up. And here it is! Some of you old school subscribers may know that every environment in my game is sharing the same single texture. I'm using an atlas so that I don't have to worry about hundreds of unique textures and materials. I found that doing so has streamlined the process of making low poly environments, as most of the legwork is done through the textures and not the geometry. Because of this, I can get about 80% of the environment done fairly quickly. I use the blockout I've made as a base and build the textured version around that. A hallmark of games on the N64 is the pronounced angular appearance of the graphics. It's often tempting for me to add additional curves to make the environments look more dynamic, but I tried to do so carefully so as not to break the aesthetic. Most N64 game environments have a limited amount of textures, so I'm trying to get as much mileage as possible from this tree texture. I've brought the first iteration of the textured environment into the game engine, and I can already see parts of it that are becoming less interesting now that it is competing with the tree texture. The tunnel is supposed to be the main point of interest here, but I feel like there's not enough time to really appreciate it once you enter the clearing. I've tried pushing it back and raising the entrance so that it's not at the same elevation as the clearing. It's a subtle change, but I feel this gives the space more time to breathe, and you can appreciate the moment you see the tunnel for longer. I think video games often struggle to make convincing forest environments, and of course mine's no exception. The tunnel is supposed to be hidden deep in the woods, but at the moment the area feels way too open for my taste. My instinct for low poly tree foliage was to make them spherical, but it just didn't feel right. I could have let it go, but I decided to take a closer look at the most famous tree in all of video games. And here can be seen that the leaves of the Deku tree actually form a star shape. With this newfound wisdom, I went back to the drawing board and redesigned my trees from this to this. They definitely look more like trees, and they frame the tunnel much nicer too. Speaking of the tunnel, there is a place I had in mind specifically for this. I pass through this tunnel every day at work during my lunch break, and it feels as though I'm entering another world when I do. I love how rich the texture of the walls are. I can't help but feel inspired every time I walk through here. There is beautiful plant life growing out of the walls, almost as though this is a place long forgotten, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Moss covers the surface of the stone, and it's a great reference for the types of materials I wish to emulate throughout my game. These archways near the tunnel entrance serve as planters for flowers and suggest a harmony between the structure and nature. I really love this stonework, and I definitely want to emulate that for the entrance I'm making. For me, it really enhances the ambiguity of the place, and I want to create a texture with a similar design to this. Let's enter the sacred number as the canvas size and start creating some N64 style textures. I'm going to use a portion of a stone wall image as a base and blur it to push the N64 feel. Let's take the saturation down too. I'm compositing an arch I've made on top of the wall and erasing the parts of it that I don't want. I think the pattern of the stone is too large compared with the arch, so I'm going to shrink it down by half and repeat it. I'm then going to rework the shadow of the archway. To help make everything feel more cohesive, I'm adding a photo filter to bring a uniform color to the texture. Things are looking quite busy at the moment, so I'm going to cut out a section inside the arch and blur it slightly, but I still want to keep the base of the arch quite sharp. Now I'm going to reduce the width of the arch and paint details back onto the texture so that it reads better from a distance. I'm knocking back the brightness and contrast as well to keep it in line with the drab look of the N64 textures. Let's also brighten up the base of the arch a tad. A really enjoyable part for me is adding moss over the stone. I'm going to take my grass texture from my atlas and paste it over the archway. Then, using a layer mask, I'm going to paint in the moss where I think it will look good. As a final touch, I'm going to add an additional layer of greenery to the texture, using a mask in much the same way as before. I'll add clouds, noise, and a blur. And then increase the contrast a bit so you can see the effect it's having. Far too strong. So I'm going to knock back the levels until I get a desirable result. And just for good measure, I'm going to improve the definition of the stonework at the base. It's done. Let's see it in game.
I hate it.
I reworked it completely, and I think this is looking way better. Right, I'm going to wrap things up for now, otherwise this video will go on forever. Thank you for joining me again for another devlog. I had a lot of fun sharing the artistic process with you. I think it's good to take a break from coding every once in a while and revel in doing some more artwork. I hope you've enjoyed my approach to this environment and found it a little inspiring for whatever you might be working on. It's always rewarding for me when I get to show you some more of what I've made, and there are many more areas of the game I have planned down the line. The gateway is just one part of a much larger forest environment, and I still have a long way to go before it's finished. As I've mentioned, I'm working as a full-time game developer, but someday I would like Legend 64 to become my main job. If you'd like to support the project, please consider checking out my Patreon page. And as always, I want to give a special shout out to my 64-bit patrons. LRC Napkin, Mario Tavalieri, Chumbledorf, Tyler Hughes, Oliver Honleyken, Yaya Damboos, Mason Stooksbury, Waro Duck, S, Melty Metroid, Paul Mayer Gorham, Icy Hot, Charles Tanner, Daniel H. Hernandez, Starkium, Power Hungry Fool, Flash the Reploid, Jake Hellspawn, Nick Grossi, Nicola Wallen, Bleak Bob, Twyla27, Robert M. Stwally IV, Ghost Nix, Baby Funky Kong, Slampy Fest.